Okay, so tonight our meeting is about the future of food. But before we get into that, I want to start with the typical stuff, and I lost my mouse, so I'm going to have to do this weird reach around thing. But a little bit about AEON3 and what we do here. So AEON3 is about the third eon of mankind. So the first eon was before we learned to write things down. So everything we did was about basic survival. And we didn't really learn things. We just kind of wandered through and were very much under the thumb of nature. In the second eon, we started writing things down. As we wrote things down, we could then learn from our past and apply that to our future. It's one of the great things about writing things down. So today, we're at the tail end of the second eon. We're on the cusp of moving towards the third eon. And the third eon is when we become no longer part of nature. We're not under the thumb of nature. We become kind of above nature, not beholden to nature's rules. And then we can do things like explore the universe and the galaxy, which we really can't do today. So that's a very brief explanation of AEON3 and what we talk about. So we get together and talk about the transition from the second to the third eon. The transition from the first to the second was very rough. The transition from the second to the third will be very rough as well, as we are finding out in these talks. So about our sponsors, I want to thank the doc for letting us have this space, and also to Blue Flame Coffee for letting us use their coffee, and also to Vegan Nirvana and their chef, Lila, who is visiting tonight.
Thank you, Bob.
There you go. So Lila's kind of a unique prodigy chef. She's 16 years old, and she is a chef at Vegan Nirvana restaurant, where she cooks. How often do you cook?
I usually jump in the kitchen every time I work.
So every day or every other day?
Yeah, probably every day.
Every day?
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm lead in the front, so kind of manage things in the front, and then I'll jump back if it's needed.
Nice, cool. So Vegan Nirvana, as you probably guessed, is a vegan restaurant, which is cool. But it serves all kinds of interesting food. So Lila's going to cook up some food for us from the future, and you'll learn why it's food from the future in a couple of minutes. Okay, so as I normally start off with these things, I start off with a history lesson, which we're going to do the same thing tonight. So I've made the type really big so that I can read it. So the ancient Greeks. One thing that's interesting about the ancient Greeks is they didn't have tomatoes. So in most places, when food evolved, it evolved around whatever there was around you. And this will be a reoccurring thing. And that's really obvious, right? People could only eat what they could grow or make within their local area. So for breakfast, they ate bread dipped in wine. The bread was made from barley, not wheat. The main source of all breads in ancient time was barley. It was probably very hard because it's made of barley, so they would soak it in wine to soften it up. I mean, you could soak it in water, but why not soak it in wine if you could soak it in wine? They ate something called a teganite that was like a pancake, this was actually made from wheat flour, olive oil, honey, and curdled milk. And then they would top it with honey and cheese, very similar to what we do. Lunch, they would have more bread and wine. Lunch was a midday snack, so a lot of times they would water down their wine and not drink it full strength because they really didn't want to get drunk. They wanted to enjoy the experience of drinking the wine. They would eat light things like figs, salted fish, cheeses, and some more bread. Dinner was, and still is, the most important meal for the Greeks. It's a very, very important meal. Friends would gather together and they would talk about politics or philosophy or whatever they wanted to talk about. But it's interesting, I say friends, not family. So very rarely, if ever, did they eat together as a family in ancient Greece. The men would eat separate from the women, and people of different status would eat at different times. If a family had slaves, they would serve the men first, then the women, and then themselves. If they didn't have slaves, then the women would serve the men first and then themselves. And typically, the women would only eat when the men were completely finished with their meal. Very, very specific tradition. It was when most foods were consumed. It was their big, heavy meal of the day. And they would eat eggs from quail and hens, fish, legume, olives, cheeses, breads, figs, and any vegetables they could grow in their local garden. These vegetables would include arugula, asparagus, cabbage, carrots, and cucumbers. And meat was pretty much reserved just for the super wealthy. The common people didn't eat meat, which I didn't know. I thought they did, but they didn't. For dessert, they had raw sugar, and honey was a sweetener they used a lot, so they would use cheeses, figs, and olives, and they would drizzle them with honey was a typical evening end to a meal. So a lot of people wonder about the Spartans. What did the Spartans eat? How did they make themselves so rough and tough? And their diet was horrible. They ate something called melazomos, which is black soup in English. It was made by boiling pig's legs, blood, salt, and vinegar. Doesn't that sound tasty? Oh, but wait, wine was the main drink of the ancient Greeks, other than water. Fetching the water was the daily task for women of the house, and the Greeks drank wine at all meals, all the time, and during the day. They made red, rose, white, and port wines, but they didn't drink it straight. They thought it was barbaric to drink wine straight. So all wine was cut with water. And they also drank something called kion, which is a barley gruel, water, or herbs, and goat cheese in an almost shake-like consistency. That sounds delicious. I want some of that right now. Woo, the Greeks. The Romans. So the Romans ate food they could grow, very similar, like vegetables. And they also used cereals to make bread. They were really big in trying to mix it up and do different things and use different cereals. One of the things, the advantage the Romans had is because they went out and conquered so much of the world, they brought all those different types of food back to Rome. And they really relished and looked at, get it, relished? A little food joke. Different cultures and the things that they did. And they really liked the different cultures and different food. They were really looking for something new all the time. So they brought all that back, and some of the new things that they found were carrots, cucumbers, cabbages, radishes, broad beans, and celery. So that stuff didn't grow in the Roman Empire, but as they went out, they found it, and they began growing it there. Really interesting. They were very fond of fish sauce called ligamen, also known as garum. Typically, they ate 3 meals a day, just like we do. Breakfast, which was bread and a wheat pancake eaten with dates and honey. Who knew pancakes were so central to ancient food? Midday, they would eat a light meal of fish, cold meat, bread, and vegetables. And a lot of times the midday meal was leftovers from the previous day's dinner. That was a very common thing for the midday meal the next day. Dinner or cena was their main meal, and it varied based on class. Different people ate different things. So the poor would eat a simple meal of vegetables and porridge, whereas the rich would enjoy several course meals, exotic foods, and wine. Wine. For the rich Romans, they ate very differently. They would throw these big, elaborate dinner parties, and sometimes these parties would last 8 hours. An 8-hour dinner party. Whew, that's a lot of work. They didn't sit on tables and chairs like we do, or as Asian people do with legs folded on mat. They didn't do that. They sat at these weird kind of tables. I was going to show you a picture of one, but they're basically like a raised-up lounge chair that's almost at the height of those tables. It's pretty high. And you would like climb up on that thing and lay in it, and it's called a triclinium. That's what it's called. Sounds very painful. Don't fall off your triclinium. And they would lay on these weird sloping couches, and that's where they would eat. And only slaves or small children were permitted to sit in chairs. It was not allowed to sit in a chair. You lounged on that thing, and you laid on your side, and you reached to the table. That was how they ate. I don't know where that evolved from. It seems to me odd, but they ate mainly with their fingers, as these guys are doing. These are actors reenacting. And when they ate with their fingers, all the food had to be cut into very small pieces that could easily be picked up with your fingers. Slaves would continually come by and wash your hands constantly while you're eating. So a little different. One of the experiences I had in Asia one time in Korea was people using communal bowls, and they would use their chopsticks, eat something, and then go and put it back and then dig back into the communal bowls. In American, I was like, whoa, that's not healthy. But that communal eating is very common around the world. But the Romans' answer to that, because everyone was communally touching, was to have someone rolling around constantly washing your hands. Spoons were used for soup, so you didn't have to tip a bowl. They actually had spoons. And rich Romans ate lots of meat. Meat was a big staple for rich Romans. Meat dishes included wild boar, wild pig, venison, wild goat, mutton, lamb, baby lamb kid, suckling pig, hare, and dormice. I'm not exaggerating. Poultry dishes were of every known bird: chicken, geese, ostriches, cranes, pheasants, pigeons, doves, thrushes. And for the very rich, their food that they really liked was peacocks. I didn't know that was an edible bird. Thanks, Romans. Okay, China. Just like saying that. Of course, what's the main staple for China? Rice. Ooh, you guys are good. So rice was the first grain that people farmed in China. There's archaeological evidence of rice farming by the Yangtze River about 6,000 BC. That's a long way back. They cooked it by boiling it in water, same as we do today. They would mix it with fish or shellfish, and they also made rice into wine. In northern China, it's too cold to grow rice, so they don't eat rice in northern China. People in northern China grow millet instead. Starting about 8,000 BC, they gathered wild sorghum. Sorghum, is that how you say that? S-O-R-G-H-U-M, sorghum. Sorghum.
Don't ask me.
Okay. You're not 8,000 BC, girl? Okay.
I don't remember
Just checking.
that time.
By 5,000 BC, many people in northern China ate mainly millet, and they boiled it and made it into kind of a porridge. Another food people associate with China is, or drink people associate with China? Tea. Tea grows wild in China. So by about 3,000 BC, or it could be much earlier, people in China had begun to drink lots of tea. Wheat was not native to China, so it took a lot longer for it to get there. People in northern China began to eat wheat about 2,500 BC. Asian traders brought wheat to China from the west, and then took millet the other way back to the west. People in China boiled wheat like millet and made something like cream of wheat with it. They thought that was tasty. These are the main carbohydrates: rice, millet, sorghum, and wheat. Probably saying it wrong. In northern China, people mostly ate millet, wheat, or sorghum. If they couldn't get these things, they lived on chestnuts. That was the solution, chestnuts. In southern China, people ate mostly rice. For fat, they would crush soybeans for soybean oil. And poor people ate almost nothing but these foods. They hardly ever had any meat or fruit. On special occasions, people would put little pieces of meat on their rice. By 5,500 BC, the Chinese were eating domesticated chickens, which came originally from Thailand into China. By 4,000 to 3,000 BC, they were eating pork, sheep, cattle, all of which had come from Central Asia. And most of the meat that they had went to the men. By 500 BC, during the Eastern Zhou dynasty, women were eating less meat and millet than men, and more soybeans and barley. Because meat was so expensive, and because Buddhists didn't eat meat, starting around the Song dynasty, about 1000 AD, people also put tofu, or bean curd, into their food as a source of protein. Because China doesn't have big forests, they don't have a lot of fuel for food, because they can't get a lot of wood. Chinese people learned to cut up their food very small, so it would cook quickly on an open fire, because you don't want to run that fire for a while. During the Han Dynasty, millet wine became very popular and was even more popular to drink than tea. Okay. Han Dynasty. Also beginning in the Han Dynasty, about 100 AD, Chinese people began to make their wheat and rice into long noodles. People ate the noodles instead of bread to save on fuel again, so they wouldn't have to, chop down those very few trees they had. The rise of the Silk Road about this time brought many new foods to China. About 500 BC, people in China learned how to keep bees for honey. By 300 BC, China was getting its first taste of sweet oranges from Central Asia. By 350 AD, traders brought sugar and maybe a new improved kind of sorghum, there it is again, from India to China. By 900 AD, Central Asian lemons started coming to China too. And of course, there was that one guy from Europe that visited China, Marco Polo. He wrote that by the time of Kublai Khan, about 1200 AD, Chinese people ate millet boiled in milk to make porridge. And even as late as 1200 AD, Chinese people did not bake bread. They did get purple carrots from Central Asia through the work of the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan. And about 1350, the artist Zainan wrote a cookbook, a collection of rules for eating and drinking that included recipes for soy sauce, noodles, crab, fish, mushrooms, tempeh, snails, and jellyfish, among other things. The Chinese. Not spaghetti. That's going the other way, east to west. But remember I talked about when they first started making noodles? I'm doing this really fast because there's a lot to go through. So there you go. Egypt. Look, I'm running out of pages. So, Egypt, ancient Egypt. The Pharaoh wanted people to eat really, really well. So, except for a few sacred animals, there was really nothing to stop the people from gathering food and eating. No one went hungry in ancient Egypt. No one. Food was roasted, boiled, fried, dried, baked, and blended. And they had plenty of fresh food to keep them healthy thanks to what goes right down the middle of Egypt? The Nile River. Perfect. Each year the Nile flows into the Mediterranean, melting snow from the mountains in the south causes the Nile to flood on its way through Egypt. As the flood waters recede, what's left behind is a rich, fertile, dark soil. It was easy to grow crops in the fertile soil. left by the annual flooding. The ancient Egyptians loved garlic. They ate vegetables, lentils, figs, dates, onions, fish, birds, eggs, cheese, and butter. Their staple foods were bread and beer. Breads were sweetened with dates and honey and figs or dates. They had flat breads. They even had yeast breads, which I didn't know, breads with dough that rises. Breads were made with barley and wheat, but beer was the most common drink in ancient Egypt. There were very few wells, and they did not want to drink the water from the Nile River. They had discovered that people that drank water from the Nile got sick, so they would make this beer product. The beer was made from barley. It was very thick, almost the thickness of a milkshake, and it didn't have very much alcohol in it, but it was very nutritional, and it was the most important part of the ancient Egyptian daily diet. The Egyptians also made both white and red wine from grapes. They added spices and honey to various wines for variety. They made non-alcoholic fruit drinks from dates. Some fish were sacred, but some kinds of fish were eaten after being roasted or dried and salted. They ate pigeons and waterfowl. They ate beef, but beef was very expensive. They ate pigs for a little while, but the priest decided that pigs were not a good thing to eat, so pork was removed. They had a sweet tooth. A popular recipe for dessert was fancy bread made with bread, cream, and honey. And they made this bread. It was very much like a cake. So, except in times of drought, when everyone suffered, no one in ancient Egypt really needed to go hungry. Pharaoh didn't ever hold back food from the people. That just wasn't something culturally that they did. They were free to fish the Nile. Anybody could fish. If you contrast this to like European kings, where you can't hunt here, you can't fish here, you can't take this. This is all mine. They really didn't have that thought. Grain was stored centrally so that people could all share from it. Food was dried and stored in lidded containers. The upper class ate meat and drank milk. They had wild birds and eggs. They ate lots of vegetables and dates. Dinner was served on a small table, which was brought to each individual. So you'd sit in your chair, and they would bring you like a little thing. People ate their food with their fingers, and they rinsed their hands between courses as needed. The lower class ate fresh bread, onions, vegetables, fish, eggs, and beer. People ate their food with their fingers while lying on woven mats made from reeds. There's some lovely food from Egypt.
Can we go back to that
Yeah.
time?
The priest just decided it was bad. So the question was, why did the Egyptians not eat pork? And they did before, and then they stopped. They just decided not to do it anymore. And I don't know why.
Because the Bible, of course,
Here.
the Jewish people believe that pork, not eating pork is because it's the word of God.
Right.
But evidently the Egyptians were not eating pork also. So it makes you wonder whether it's the
On the time frame, yeah. So
trichinosis or something
So
else.
where that comes from is from the Jewish people, is from a book called the Torah,
Right.
which is a very long tome of collection of books. It's huge. And in there, most of what was in there for food rules for the Jewish people actually came from their observations of what made you sick. And it's the mixing of certain kind of foods would cause that. And you're probably right. It probably was something like trichinosis that they saw that this happened more often, and therefore the priest said, you can't eat this, or you shouldn't eat this with this. And so.
Yeah, the uncleanness, the trichinosis, the sickness is half of the problem. The other half of the problem is that pigs compete directly with humans. They eat the exact same things people
In the wild, yeah.
And so you'd have to, they would be in direct competition with you for food.
Yeah, if you were growing a garden and there's wild pigs or wild boars around, they're a nightmare. So yeah, probably true. So either way, the priest just decided no more eating of the pigs and stopped, and that's why it changed. And maybe it was related to the same rules of why other religious groups or ethnic groups or cultures stopped eating pork. But I like pork. Pork tastes good. I'm just saying. What is that line? Bacon tastes good. Pork chops taste good. Okay, and then the Americans. The Americans came across the sea and landed here in America, and then we were going to eat the way we ate in Britain. Really good idea, right? No. Why? It's way colder here on the Northeast where they first arrived. Much colder. So in the winters, the kinds of foods that they were eating just weren't available, and so they would all literally starve to death. So the Indians observed them constantly starving because they weren't storing foods and they didn't know how to eat off the land in North America, and that's why the Indians started sharing their culture with the new people, the new immigrants from Europe, and training them on how to eat these kinds of foods and how to hunt these kinds of foods and make these kinds of things. So pretty cool. A lot of what we eat today is from the Native American people that lived here that then passed that knowledge along to the newcomers and made our lives much better and made it much easier to live, especially on the East Coast where, the winters can be very, very harsh. And I just think it's ironic that, British people are used to Britain where it's cold, but it never really gets like, like Boston or New York in the middle of the winter. So really interesting that they pass that along to us. So that was the little history of food. So can we keep eating like this? What do you guys think?
Probably not.
Oh, you guys stole my thunder. No, we cannot. Why can't we? Well, let's talk about some numbers. A lot of these come from a movie called Cowspiracy that I know you're a big fan of.
I'm a big fan.
So if you get a chance to see this movie, feel free to have a seat, you guys, anywhere. Just turn a chair around. There's chairs over there. So for carbon footprint for greenhouse gases, a meat eater is producing about 3.3 tons of carbon gas per year. A vegan is doing about 1.5 tons. Meat eaters are the highest carbon footprint. Vegans are the lowest for food products. And this is not an advertisement. I am not a vegan. My daughter is, and of course Lila is.
Yeah.
But I eat all the meat that I can. But this is about sustainability. This is about how are we going to live. Today, there's how many people on the planet? 7.5 billion. How many is there projected to be by the year 2100?
20.
11.5 to 15 or higher. We don't know. That's just right around the corner. Some people in this room today will be alive to see that. Carbon footprint, raising livestock, 51% of all carbon gases. 51% comes from raising livestock. All transportation, it's right there, Phil. Can you guys hand Phil the mic? Steve, pass back. All transportation, all of it. Planes, ships, trains, cars, trucks, buses, taxis, all of it combined produces 13% of all the carbon greenhouse gases that we make. Raising livestock, 51%. Do you have a question? We'll get there. We'll get there. That's a really good point. So, nitrous oxide emissions. Livestock is 65% of all the nitrous oxide emissions that are created. And by the way, nitrous oxide emissions are 296% more destructive than CO2. It is a terrible thing for the environment for us to raise livestock. How about this? One of these numbers will grab you. 2,500 cows equals 411,000 humans from a waste products that we produce. Drowning in cow poo. Every minute, 7 million pounds of excrement are produced by livestock. Every minute. So in the time that I've been talking to you so far, how many pounds of poo have been made?
A lot.
That's a lot of poo.
Yeah.
Too bad we can't eat that. Ew. You burn it for fuel, exactly.
There you go.
There actually was a show I watched a couple of years ago where people were doing that. They were taking livestock waste and then baking it down to carbon and then making it into briquettes. I don't want it. I get it. It works, but ew. Livestock covers 45% of the Earth's land. You know, I always say we have land, right? There's all this land. Like if you go up to Northern California or out to the desert, there's all this land. No, there isn't. What's on it? Cows. Cows.
Good sound effect.
Cows. 1 to 2 acres of rainforest is cleared every second. How many acres of rainforest have disappeared so far during this talk? Too many. There's so many problems with that, I can't even describe them all. But just dealing with just the food aspects. Water. 1 hamburger is 660 gallons of water. Enough for you to shower every day for 2 months. One hamburger. Not a cow, 1 hamburger. Meat and dairy, just meat and dairy, accounts for 1/3 of all the fresh water that we use on the planet today. We have water shortages, right? We're running out of water. California is running out of water. California is also a huge dairy producer and beef producer. That's a giant challenge for us. This one just blew me away. All the water that we use domestically, all of it is 5% of the water that the United States produces. 55% of that water goes to animal agriculture. 55%. So when you turn off your tap or turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth, that's awesome. But think about how little impact you're actually having. You're not really doing anything. You're affecting 5% and maybe making it, a little smaller number. But that 55% water usage number is one of the things that's just absolutely unsustainable. When you go from 7.5 billion people to 11 to 15 to 20 to 50 billion or whatever number you want to count on the high end. How about extinctions? 110 animal and insect species are lost every day just in the rainforest. Not talking about everything else, just in the rainforest. We're wiping them out. I can't even imagine every day. What does that mean? Right, we don't know the long tail of that. We don't know what that will do. How about fish? 90 million tons of fish are pulled out of the ocean every year. 90 million tons. Was the ocean designed to feed that many people? How about this one? For every pound of fish, those 90 million pounds, 5 pounds of bycatch are caught. So it's not 90 million. It's 90 million plus 90 million times 5 that's being pulled out. Okay, how you guys feeling? This is my how you guys feeling now? Beat you up. So it's going to be really rough for us to continue where we are, to keep going the way we're going, to keep eating the way we're eating. If you look at some of the ancient societies, it did kind of divide up that way. The rich people got to eat the meat. The poor people didn't. The rich people got to eat, a wide variety of food. The poor people didn't, except in Egypt. I got that. As we move forward towards the third eon, and our population continues to grow, and people live longer, healthier lives, we're going to have problems with water. We already are having problems with water, right? Fresh drinking water is something everyone should have, and a lot of people don't. If you're giving that fresh drinking water to cows, you're making a huge mistake, right? You just can't sustain that. So we're going to have to change the way we eat. We're going to have to look at some different alternatives. And I'm going to let Lila talk a little bit now about some of the alternatives.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot out there. Like he said, meat and dairy and eggs, they're all fairly unsustainable. So just as an example, right now I'm making chili with Beyond Meat beef crumbles. They taste pretty much the same to me. They're really good, and they help with the environment and all the problems that go along with that. Also, Vegan Nirvana, the place where I work, it's a vegan restaurant, and no commitment. You don't have to be vegan when you walk in the door, right? But basically, like he's saying, he's not vegan, but having a vegan meal every once in a while does impact more so than turning off the faucet or other things like that. And yeah, I have chicken tenders right here. Our chicken tenders, it's the heaven on earth. We have fun names like that, right?
So it's important to recognize there's no chicken in those chicken tenders.
That's the trick.
You guys are going to get to eat all this, by the way. You're
Yeah.
going to all try this. That's the whole thing. We're going to do this in a minute.
We also have our Ocean of Love shrimp. It looks identical, I would say, to shrimp, and it tastes really dang good.
So we went there with Emma and her boyfriend, and her boyfriend was like, I don't know about this. I don't want to eat this food. And then, oh my goodness, when he ate the shrimp, in particular, the shrimp dish, he was like, oh my God, this is so good. It's so amazing.
If it's Lawrence approved, it's everybody
There
approved.
you go.
Yeah, we also have great fish tacos. That about the ocean thing, they're expecting to have pretty much fishless oceans by I think 2045, which is, without the ocean, there's a lot of effects of that. So anything we can do to save and cut back on fish is very helpful.
Yeah, the United Nations, I don't know if you guys know this, has projected by the year 2050 that all all commercially viable fish will be fished out by 2050. It's right around the corner. We're literally heading towards just a hard stop point on the oceans, and when we just can't go past that. And you know, one of the questions is, you look at it today, and the ocean is so vibrant and full of life, and it's, you know, it seems fine. We're pulling 90 million pounds of fish out of the ocean a year. That's a lot of protein, right? But the problem is if we continue at that rate, it's not just the pulling of fish out. And you know, Heather, you could probably talk more about this than I could, but there's lots of other things that are going on. Human runoff from our waste into the oceans is causing devastating impacts on phytoplankton and on all the smallest of the animals in the ocean. And then also algae blooms are wiping out the oxygenation of the ocean and making it so that the ocean is getting unsustainable for fish, right? Because we're hitting the bottom of the food chain, and then we see that later at the top of the food chain. So there's a lot of different things going on there that we have to kind of think about how we're affecting the world with our most common activity, which is eating. It's hard to grasp, but it is. We really need to change. And these foods represent some of the kind of foods that we will be eating in the future, because there's other new future technologies coming out, right? There's things like grown meat products where we're growing them in a lab. But there's some questions about that. What kind of water usage does that do versus growing meats naturally, right? So we need to look not just at can we do it, we need to look at is it sustainable to do it that way, right? So some of these vegan foods, you know, you got to get under the covers on things, how they are manufactured. Does it use an enormous amount of electricity or enormous amount of water or enormous amount of something that then costs something else, right? These chains, there's my chain thing again, these chains that make up food that lead to what we eat are relatively unknown to us today, right? Some of us are in the food industry, and they can see, you know, what the chains are. But for most of us that just eat food that we get, you know, from the store or from a restaurant, we really have no idea of the chains or the resource cost to produce that food. So that'd be an interesting thing to add to food labels, right? The resource cost. What did it cost to make this food in water? What did it cost in land? What did it cost in dollars? Right? That's a knowable number. Maybe we could build a blockchain for that. There's a good idea.
There you go, Bob.
So things for you guys to think about. What's another food of the future? Grab a mic and yell back at me. Anybody, Bueller. Don't be shy. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. He's thinking, I can see his head. He's like, the gears are turning. So one of the foods of the future, it's rough, guys, is insects. Right? Insects are super plentiful. They are super high in protein. Now, one of the things I liked about, because I always try to use movies as a reference point because it's something that most of us have shared and have seen. In the movie Blade Runner 2049, there's a guy in there that's a protein farmer, and he's growing little grubs, right? Now, they don't eat those grubs when they're that way, because ew, some people do, but I'm not a fan. You can take that, though, and make it into all kinds of interesting food products, right? You could make it into, well, vegan cheese, but it wouldn't be vegan then, because it's got an animal in it. But you could make it into other things that then get the protein and the nutritional value that doesn't necessarily have as big of an impact on the environment, and it's something that's very sustainable. So I think we're going to explore a lot of things like that, where we find products that we can make into things that look reminiscent or smell reminiscent or taste reminiscent to things that we like and we're used to, but in the chain that manufactured them underneath, it's something totally different than what we were thinking that we're eating. And when you taste this shrimp and this chicken, you're gonna be freaked out. So Lila, are you gonna leave it there? Did they come up? Is that?
Yeah, sure. This is just the chicken tenders for now, but we have 3 sauces. We have ranch, chipotle, and vegan island sauce.
No eggs.
No eggs, no dairy, no chicken, as we've
no chicken
covered, right? Our meat products, the chicken is made out of wheat and soy protein, and then our shrimp is actually made out of konjac root. I don't know if you heard about it. It's like a Japanese root that's actually, they use as medicinal, but it also happens to have a very like fish spongy texture to it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And there's some challenges with this. You know, I've done a lot of research on veganism because my daughter is vegan. And my wife and I were very concerned when she, announced to us that she was going to go this route with her food choices. And we didn't know anything about it. It was a difficult thing for us to judge as parents because we didn't know, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What does it mean? So, we went out and did some research and read up on it. And it turns out there are some challenges, especially for young people. Young people growing up with a vegan diet, there's not a long list, but a list of amino acids that they don't get from that type of eating because we are designed to be carnivores. So it's a challenge to then supplement what you're eating with protein powders and supplement powders, especially for younger people, to make sure you're getting that right balance and mix of amino acids to simulate as if you're eating meat. But our daughter in particular has gone through this transition very artfully and in a very healthy way, is what I'm trying to say. And she's done a great job with it, and I'm super proud of her. So, question?
Yeah. One of my questions is regarding chicken. I've been doing a lot of research for the last couple of months, obviously, since Emma has gone vegan.
Yep.
And I want to support her.
Emma's
Yes.
grandmother, by the way, for those of
Emma is one of my dear grandchildren. And so far, the only thing I can see about chicken is there's a concern because they are raised in very inhumane conditions. So what did you find out regarding that? Why do we have to eliminate chickens if we raise them in a very humane, range-free or free range, I guess it's called, condition,
Right.
where we are being kind to them and they're giving their eggs freely. It doesn't hurt them a bit.
Right.
Egg is one of the prime proteins.
There's a number of people in the room that want to answer your question.
I heard the number one cause of high cholesterol is chicken now. The
High
number one
cholesterol.
cause in America for high cholesterol is caused by chicken.
Yeah, and chicken
Because of the
chicken is
way
some-
they
yeah,
are raised.
the way they're raised.
And
chicken is,
bioengineered.
yeah, chicken is something that the way we raise it, because there's so many of them in such tight quarters, that chickens were never designed to live like that, right? So just think about this. When you have chickens that are stacked on top of chickens and they poo, right, it's just a mess. I mean, they're not designed to live in a space this big. So the way that we solve that problem is by pumping chickens full of all kinds of things that probably chickens shouldn't be pumped full of. And the problem is when it doesn't show up right away. A lot of these activities that we're doing to try to sustain, in a very artificial environment. We're having this problem with pigs too. And we had it with cows, right? Remember mad cow disease? When we start to do these things and raise these animals in very unnatural conditions because we don't have land, we don't have water, we don't have feed for them, so we make up something different for them to eat. That's what caused mad cow disease. And we make up different things, and we put them in an unnatural environment, and then we add hormones and try to genetically manipulate them, because that's the next thing that's coming, is we're going to try to genetically manipulate chickens more than we already have. You wind up with something that you don't know what the long-term effects of that. And this isn't just chickens, by the way. This is going to be a huge problem for these type of foods.
Okay, well, let's go back to chickens. You remember, I was raised on a farm at my earliest years, and my favorite activity was going and letting the chickens out of their coop.
Yeah.
And Mom went running through the forest to catch the chickens and get them back in their coop. They had plenty of free range. They had a big coop during the day, and then they went into the shed where they had their own little perch.
That was fine back in the day when we had land and stuff. I have a lot of neighbors in my local neighborhood that are raising chickens.
Well,
right
let's
around.
keep doing it that way then, and still have advantage
probably,
of
and that's
chicken.
probably safer as long as we have land, so that we're not raised. And that's why the people do it. They have a chicken coop. They let the chickens run around their backyard. And
Yeah.
if you want to create a sustainable thing in your own house, cool. I can tell you, I don't like them at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning because they're chickens, and you guys know what chickens do when the sun comes up.
Well, the rooster does.
God,
Yes.
it's annoying. Oh, every
You ignore him after you've been around him
Well,
for
yeah, but
many,
it's
many
different
years
when
like
you
I
live in the
was.
city versus when you live in the country. So
Okay, but back to the cholesterol. Where's Diana? Diana, the cholesterol is actually in the chicken meat? Oh, I know it's in the eggs. I know it's in the eggs, in the yolk particularly, but not in the chicken.
I don't know which one that is.
Bob, should I bring it over to them?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really
Okay.
good idea. Okay, cool. So chickens is one. Chickens is, I think, a fairly sustainable thing. I kind of feel the same thing about it. But I'm worried about what we're putting into our food. And we have the same challenge with these kind of foods, right? Because these kind of foods are manufactured, right? They're manufactured. So we have to be careful of the same kind of long tail when we look at these. The good news is I've found that people that eat vegan are much more concerned about the links in the chain that built their food. They're very much educated about their food, and they think about what it took to make it and, and where it came from. So that's probably the main message here. It's not be vegan or don't be vegan or eat chicken or don't eat chicken. It's be aware of what's in the links of the food chain that made that food. It was different in the old days where you grew the chickens on a ranch, like you're saying, and you went out and you fixed a chicken for dinner, right? But it's different today when we're looking at mass industrial farms and we really don't know what's going on, and the government is, in theory, regulating it, so it's kind of tough. Sir?
Okay, two things. But one thing about
Yeah.
chickens is we start replacing beef farms, all that acreage. You can grow a lot more chickens on the same piece of land as a piece.
Chick-fil-A is completely with you.
No, I mean, because I lived in the rainforest with an indigenous tribe.
Yeah.
And they tried to grow one cow and would never
Oh,
do it
no
again
way. Yeah.
because it was awful.
No,
it took
it's
up
terrible.
too much resources,
Yeah.
too much land.
Well,
and
this
was
is
filthy and dirty.
This
and
is why
they
when you look at
couldn't do
the ancient Chinese diet, the first real protein other than fish that they introduced into their diet was chicken. Chickens are, I have this theory about food animals. When you look at them, there's some animals that were just made to be eaten. The chicken is a bird that's big and fat, can't run real fast, can't fly. Any predator can run down a chicken. So, other than maybe a small lizard, but any predator of a certain size, can take down a chicken.
I knew an expert on chickens, and he traced cultural traits through how they brought the chickens and what chickens they brought with them across as they moved across as they migrated. It was an interesting thing. But the other thing is, as we approach AEON3, we keep it back on topic.
Yep.
We will start to master biology, and the first place we will do it is with things like food.
Food, absolutely. And that's what this represents, is the beginning of mastery of biology. That's exactly right. And the growing of artificial meats is an interesting thing. But then resource-wise, is that sustainable is always my question. Right. So, okay, who's had a bite of some of the food yet? Anybody? Looking for some food feedback. Grab that microphone so that people online can hear you. Because everyone online right now is going, is the food good? Is it not good? What does it taste like? Joyce, grab that mic. Come on. I know your mouth is full, but tell people what it's like. It's delicious. What does it taste like, though?
It has a lot of spices. It's savory. You wouldn't think it's not chicken. It's not savory. It doesn't lack the buttery feeling that you get with proteins,
Yep.
and it's not bland at all.
Not bland. Cool.
And then the breading, the crust, it's really nice too. So you don't just eat a plain.
So I just got to say it. So it kind of tastes like chicken?
It tastes like chicken. If you
Because
didn't-
everything tastes like chicken.
If you didn't tell me, I wouldn't know. It's like,
Cool. Thank you. All right, cool. So any other questions, comments? You guys are doing good? You got some? No, you don't. You do. Tastes like chicken. There you go. Any other questions or comments about the subject matter? Feel free.
Not only does it taste like chicken, it is a vast improvement. I had one of the very first tofurkey.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a
I'm
vast
so sorry.
improvement over that.
Yeah, the texture of that was way
we don't
wrong.
talk about tofurkey.
First rule about tofurkey is we don't talk about
Yeah,
tofurkey.
yeah.
Yeah, its
cool.
texture was wrong. It was kind of
Yeah.
chalky.
Definitely
Yeah.
improved in that tofurkey area.
All right, cool. Well, that's all I had for a prepared talk tonight. If anybody else doesn't have any comments, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the broadcast on Facebook Live, and then we will. You want to say? Oh, grab the mic. Sorry, there's a comment.
Do you want? Oh.
Okay. Those of us who are in technology, we see a tsunami of changes in every aspect of life. How we're going to live in terms of self-driving cars, how we're going to have homes, how we're going to interact with other humans.
Bring him a shrimp.
That extends to how we're going to produce our food. Now I'm not talking about 50 years, 100 years, I'm talking about 200 years in AEON 3. That's the subject of this group, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question for Lila.
Lila.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you hear what I just said?
Sorry, no.
Okay.
Pat was helping
Let's
me
start
with
with that.
something over there. I got distracted.
So
yeah.
we work in technology, okay? And we see a lot of changes happening
Yeah.
in our lives because of technology, including self-driving cars and yada, 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 right? That includes how we farm foods and how we produce food. I see a future where computers are going to be involved in how we are farming and how we are producing crops and
Definitely.
all that type of stuff. My question to you is, genetically engineered foods by computers or AI, how is it going to, what is your opinion about that process involving the organic ingredients that you and vegan industry uses?
Yeah, definitely super meat, which I think is kind of what you're talking about.
So explain what that is, because a lot of people don't know.
Yeah,
like
super
me.
meat is kind of like grown meat, basically. They don't harm animals, but they do take DNA from chickens or other cows, whatnot, and they grow the meat using these basically stem
Stem cells,
cell
yep.
dishes sort of thing. And my opinion on it is I think it's great because definitely not everybody wants to give up meat because it is such a big cultural and we grew up with it and all tastes good, whatnot. And I think it's a really good solution. So, but until then, I feel like vegan options and other options are gonna help us.
Yeah, and I think the super meat products too, when you look at them, they might be super expensive. It might be a challenge just cost-wise for those.
The super meat?
Yeah, I don't know how much it is.
It's actually going to be cheaper since
Cheaper,
we don't
okay.
have to buy land and raise
Resources.
the chickens.
Yep.
But yeah, it will be cheaper, and their prediction is that they will have them in like fast food chains, like your local supermarkets. They'll be growing meat at the counter and then selling it right away.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a wacky future.
Yeah,
So
imagine.
one of the other things too in the future of food, now that you brought that up, because it's a really good point, is jobs, right? And I think that's where you're kind of leading to is jobs. Jobs in the food industry are huge, right? Most of, I would say a huge, I don't know the number, but it's a huge percentage of labor in America is either manufacturing, producing, shipping, distributing, storing, selling, or serving, or washing the dishes of the whole food industry, right? And interestingly, I think this is a particular area that is relatively immune to artificial intelligence and robotics. I don't want a robot serving me food. I'm cool with a robot washing the dishes,
Yeah,
right?
me too.
So there's some problems there. But in terms of cooking and preparing, exactly, yeah, there's that too, that robots look more like us, more human than human, I think is the statement. Yeah, but you get my point, is that I think this particular area is that if you work in the food service industry, which of course you do, your job is pretty much unaffected by some of these changes in technology that are going to wipe out whole other industries, which is great news for you, Lila. Good career choice, by the way.
I get to keep my job.
Get to keep your job. So any other questions, comments, or yes, go ahead.
I just like even in the original Star Trek, the replicators, the food didn't look like food.
Right.
It was geometric shapes.
Yeah, and then later they changed it. Yeah.
They changed it. But the thing is, and the thing that I'm going to head toward is, it doesn't matter. Because as we raise new children and raise new generations,
they have new ideas.
That will be the norm.
Right.
And it's us old people, they're going to be the ones that are fighting this
Yeah.
new technology.
We're gonna want bacon, and we're not gonna go easily into the good night of no bacon.
We also do have a BLT that I
Of
will
course you
say.
do.
I will say. It's
Is it
like
really good?
practically Lawrence approved.
Okay, so turn around for 1 second. Stop
Yeah.
serving chili for 1 second.
Woo.
I would like you all guys to give Lila a huge hand for coming out tonight.
Thank
you
you.
very much for coming. It's really great
Yeah.
having you here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, cool. And people on Facebook, I don't know if this is the camera. I'm going to say goodbye. And goodbye, people on Facebook. Thanks for joining us for AEON3. And next week there is no meeting, but the week after that is open mic night. So I'm not going to talk. You're going to talk. You're going to bring your questions, and I'm going to try to answer them. It's going to be stump the guy from the future questions. So open mic night 2 Tuesdays from now after the holiday. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. We're going to go into overtime. You guys can hang around, eat food, drink, and enjoy the time. Thanks again, Lila.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.